Let us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, we are very honored today to have a distinguished guest in your gallery. He is visiting our province on invitation from me and from the Government of Alberta. I'd like to introduce to you the Honourable David Peterson, Premier of the Province of Ontario.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the annual report for the year ending December 1986 of the Alberta Health Facilities Review Committee. This committee, Mr. Speaker, chaired by the Honourable Member for Cypress, visited unannounced a large number of health facilities throughout the province during that year.
To file copies of a very important announcement that was made earlier this morning with respect to a proposed $270 million petrochemical project to be located near Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the annual report for the year 1985-86 for Alberta Department of Housing.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 28 members of the Avonmore 60 and Over Club who are with United Church. They are seated in the public gallery. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly 33 grade 6 students from the G.W. Smith School located in the constituency of Red Deer South. They are accompanied by 4 of their teachers and 4 of their parents. Their principal, Mr. Hornby, Mr. Ray Molson, Mr. Reed, Mr. Cousins, who is a teacher intern, and 3 parents, Mrs. Savage, Mrs. Carvell, Mrs. Rowlandson. I would ask that they all stand in the members' gallery and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and members of the Assembly some 39 students, grade 6 students from the Norwood, I'd like to stress, community school. I spent a lot of time in this school, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure members it is one of the best in the province. They're accompanied by 2 teachers, Mr. Stuart McCormick and Miss Helen Cortes. They're seated in the public gallery. I would ask them to stand and receive the traditional welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored today to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly a colleague and good friend from another government, Mayor Jerry Doyle of Edson. Mayor Doyle is in the public gallery, and if he'll rise, I'm sure we'll give him our traditional welcome.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce 38 grade 6 students from the Robina Baker School in Devon. They are accompanied by teachers Mrs. Duperrin and Mrs. Nicholson, and parents Mrs. Cassis, Mrs. Hartman, Mrs. Sidrowski, and Mrs. Doyle. They're seated in the members' gallery and I believe in the public gallery, and I ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to advise the House that today, April the 7th, is World Health Day, as recognized by the World Health Organization and allied health bodies. The theme this year, Mr. Speaker, is immunization, a chance for every child. And this ties in with a significant activity of this government. As was announced in the throne speech, the government is expanding its immunization services by purchasing a supply of Haemophilus influenza B vaccine, which all Albertans will be able to obtain at their local health unit to help protect their children against meningitis. As well, in the next few weeks, we will be launching a campaign to encourage Albertans to have their children immunized against measles, a serious disease against which immunization provides almost total protection. Mr. Speaker, I hope this World Health Day will remind us all of the effectiveness of immunization against unnecessary and preventable diseases, and will raise the awareness in the public's mind of the importance of immunization for all Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, I agree.
Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, we've been receiving a number of letters about the WW Cross Cancer Institute, and apparently they've decided to discontinue the callback service previously provided for cancer patients. And the reason given for this cutback is that the 3% cutback of funds to hospitals in Alberta. My question to the minister is, how can the minister justify this punitive, short-sighted measure for cancer patients who are already facing a great deal of stress?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that that situation exists.
Mr. Speaker, we've talked to the people at the Cross Cancer Institute. I wish the minister had learned what's happening in his own department, but he'll have to take my word for it. There will be no longer cutbacks. Well,
if he doesn't know about it,
his own deputy minister.
Somebody has to help him out. Somebody has to help him out with his portfolio. And my question is to the minister: is the minister saying then that he is not aware that they have instituted that there will no longer be the cutbacks, that people can go back for yearly checkups, that this is one of the things happening in the Cross Cancer Institute? Is he not aware of this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Cross Cancer Institute, like other hospitals across the province, has been asked to operate in the coming fiscal year with 97% of the funding they had last year. The hospital is in the process of determining how they will adjust their internal delivery of services to meet that budgetary target. I have not yet had presented to me from the hospital the final decision of the board as to how they will meet that target. My understanding is that it does not include the kind of cutbacks the honourable member refers to, but that may well be part of the discussion that's presently going on. But I'm not aware that that has been finalized by the board of the hospital.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely amazed the minister doesn't know what's going on in his own department. This is a letter that's gone out from the director of the Cross Cancer Institute to cancer patients, probably affecting over 1,000 or more people. Now, is the minister saying then that he was totally unaware of that? And if he was totally unaware of it, will he look into this and bring back this needed remedy for cancer patients in the province?
Two things, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has a little bit of confusion between the Cross Cancer Clinic, a Crown-owned but independently operated in terms of its Board of Directors hospital, and the Department of Hospitals Medical Care. The department does not operate the Cross Cancer Clinic. Insofar as the clinic's decisions with respect to how they serve their patients, I am not in a position to either approve or disapprove of whatever steps they take, except with respect to the closure of beds, which must receive the approval of the Minister of Hospitals or his designate. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, that the matter that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is referring to is a direct result of their budgetary cuts or not, or whether or not it's been finalized. I have to say I have not seen a particular letter. There are dozens and dozens of letters and directives that go out from hospital boards every day. I don't keep track of them all. We have a responsible board in place to operate that hospital that are doing, in my opinion, a very good job. And I have to live with and abide by, as the Honourable Member has to, some of the decisions that they are made. But if the Honourable Member has a specific problem with the particular move that the board has made, I'd be happy to look into it.
Mr. Speaker, to this minister, would they be cutting back this callback procedure if you hadn't cut back the resources by 3%? So the direct responsibility is with this minister and his department. And my question to the minister is simply this: will he look into this? And if this is in fact happening, will he give them the funds to bring this procedure back to the Cross Cancer Institute?
Speaker, I just answered the first part of the Honourable Member's question by saying if the Honourable Member has a specific concern or problem, then he should let me have the information and I will look into it. In terms of providing additional funding, the answer is that that institution, along with a lot of others, has to find ways to live within a budget that's 97% of what it was last year. If we are to make exceptions to that every time the Honourable Leader of the Opposition or someone else figures that there's a hardship because of a 3% reduction in funding, there's simply no way we'll ever meet the target of maintaining our healthcare system in this province and preventing the costs from going above what we can afford to pay.
For Evans Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that the minister is doing a hospitals review announced in the throne speech to rationalize utilization of beds throughout the province, but with the 3% cutback, it's now evident what's going to happen. Surgical beds are closing all through our cities. Mr. Speaker, to the minister, will the minister take the initiative now to consult with the Alberta Hospital Association to determine some means to deal with the immediate situation so that persons in our province are not put at risk?
Mr. Speaker, it's not a matter of dealing or consulting with the Alberta Hospitals Association. I think that the proper procedure is one of the administration of each individual hospital making their own decisions about how they meet their budgetary targets, working with staff of my department, which many of them are doing, in trying to develop ways to meet the budget targets. Thus far, I haven't seen anything in terms of the decisions those boards have made that's extremely alarming. Certainly there's some bed closures going to occur, but in most cases I think they are prepared to make better utilization of the existing beds and thereby maintain a level of patient care that's equal to what they had before. There has been in the past, the Honourable Member should know, a great deal of waste that occurs in our healthcare system, and I find that healthcare professionals and those who are operating the hospitals right across this province are now looking much more carefully at the dollars they spend and where they spend them, and I have every confidence that we're going to come out of this 3% reduction in funding with an even better delivery of health care by hospital boards than we had before.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my question to the member from Athabasca-Lac-La Biche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Education, the Ministre de l'Éducation, Mr. Speaker, these questions are pertaining to Section 23 of the Constitution Act signed by this province on April the 19th, 1982. Les Franco-Albertains attendent impatiemment depuis 1982.
Order, honourable member. Order, please, honourable member. The chair rises with great hesitation, but the honourable member and the chair had discussion last June with respect to the use of the French language in the Assembly, and permission was indeed granted for that to take place within debates, but at that time there was mutual consent that that would not occur during question period. En anglais, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Speaker, when I rose in the House last year, I claimed the right to be able to speak in French in this House. And I don't think that right has been abolished by your statement. Les Franco-Albertains attendent impatiemment depuis...
Order, please, honourable member. The chair directs that the questions will be in English, or the member will forfeit the position.
Okay, if you do wish the translation, but I want to raise a point of order relating to this because I think my rights are not being abided by this legislature. To the Minister of Education, the Francophone Albertans have been waiting since 1982, since the signing of the charter by this province, to have their School Act recognize their rights to their minority language right legislation. I hope that this minister is aware that under Section 31 of the Charter, individuals or groups who are denied their constitutional rights under Section 23 can sue this government for their non-compliance. Now, will the minister indicate today that the proposed School Act will respond to the demand of the Section 23 of the Charter?
Mr. Speaker, I will respond by saying that the School Act will certainly address the matter of the language of instruction in our schools, but as to specific content of the Act, obviously that will have to await its introduction, which is committed to by our speech from the throne earlier in the year.
When will the minister be introducing this new School Act? Will it be in this spring session or next fall?
Mr. Speaker, as was clearly indicated in the throne speech on March the 4th, the School Act will be introduced during this spring session and will be preceded by a framework document.
I'm very glad to hear that, Mr. Speaker. Will the new Alberta School Act instruct or ensure that school boards provide French language minority homogeneous facilities where there are sufficient numbers and where such a request has been made by parents that are properly defined under the Charter?
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my first answer, the specific content of the School Act is not something I can speak to in the absence of the legislation. The matter of the language of instruction within schools will certainly be part of that document.
My last supplementary, so as not to burden the local school board, will the minister indicate whether sufficient education funding, both by the provincial and federal government, will be made available to school boards to provide French minority language instruction in such facility?
Mr. Speaker, the matter of minority language instruction in our schools is an exceedingly important one. Important enough that I introduced a bill in this Assembly, Bill 31, during the last sitting, to recognize the importance of the language of instruction and to recognize the importance of the rights in Section 23 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The matter of how we will implement French language instruction through our school boards is one which is obviously part of the overall School Act. It is also one which is subject to interpretation and is currently before the courts. However, I would like to highlight that the interest of Albertans in French education is clearly indicated by the fact that the students in our French language programs, be they for francophones or immersion programs, has tripled over the past 10 years, and certainly that growing interest in French language education is one of the many matters that will have to be be part of our whole discussion on the School Act.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, as the Minister well knows, my constituency, Westlock Sturgeon, is one of the pioneer spots for Francophones settling in Alberta. We are concerned about the Francophone schools. In spite of the commendable record for French immersion classes in this province, there's much left to be desired on the actual Francophone classes. In other words, how would you like to go to an English immersion school? And so is there any possibility that you could review the grant system, even if not the Act changed, so that it is easier for Francophones to attend school, particularly the intermediate and high schools, and put them together so that people can attend them for quite a distance around?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure what the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party means by easier to attend school. Certainly the matter of French language rights as espoused in Section 23 of the Charter is one of the Charter issues that we are addressing within the overall context of the School Act, and as Bill 31 addressed during the last session. I fully recognize that an immersion school is not perhaps in the fullest context a Francophone school. However, what I do think is important is that school boards are recognizing the uniqueness within their communities, and some communities in Alberta are in fact happy to have an immersion kind of program to recognize their Section 23 rights. Others are looking at the whole way in which Section 23 rights will be addressed. But as I have said, the matter is currently before the courts, and I am awaiting eagerly the decision on the Bounier case.
Main question, Leader of the Liberals.
Mr. Speaker, I had been thinking of elected Francophone boards, but this question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. With respect to continuing questions yesterday on, Mr. Speaker, on VENCAP. Yesterday, the Minister admitted that VENCAP had not been making the venture investments as fast as had been expected to, but this could be because of a lack of business opportunities or a lack of initiative in pursuing these opportunities. But regardless, there is a pool of some $200 million of government money sitting there doing nothing to create jobs. Can he tell the House, or can the Minister tell the House, if he has given VENCAP management a timetable from which he expects their pool of $200 million to be invested in diversifying this province?
No, I have not, Mr. Speaker, but I'm sure it would be useful for the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon to review and refer to the annual report of VENCAP with respect to their investments and the consequences of those investments in creating employment in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, I have done that. As you know, only 20% of the money has been spent. But is VENCAP's $300,000, for instance, investment in the SPURT investment fund, which the Minister mentioned yesterday, which itself provides, the SPURT fund provides venture capital to small business, not more or less an admission that VENCAP's $500,000 investment guideline, which is the minimum they've been working on, is too restrictive and prevents small business from accessing VENCAP's funds?
Mr. Speaker, when VENCAP was established, it was clearly the government's intention that VENCAP would concentrate on the larger projects and that the role of Alberta Opportunity Company would be to continue to respond to the needs of the smaller entrepreneurs or the smaller businesses. And the investment in SPURT is in our view, a useful investment by VENCAP within the parameters that was given to them and in being of a size appropriate to the guidelines, as well as providing venture capital for smaller companies.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, I appreciate your point that SPURT is a good investment, and therefore would the Minister consider asking VenCap management to look for or help set up other SPURT-type funds in order to increase the flow of funds from VenCap through to the small business sector?
Mr. Speaker, VenCap is doing that right now.
So I'm very glad to hear that, although it's been 3 years in the making. Well, and then in view of the government's January 8th announcement, possibly, Mr. Speaker, I can switch it over to the Minister of Telecommunications, really, is January the 8th announcement that they had put an additional $500,000 into SPURT with a commitment for another $1.5 million. Over the next 3 years, can the Minister tell the House why this investment was not done through VenCap?
Mr. Speaker, at the time of the original discussions, and I think one must go back to that time when the SPURT concept was being developed, I'm not at that time aware of how much involvement there had been with VenCap, but the SPURT concept was seen as a very desirable concept, one that would assist in the government's announced intention to support small business, and accordingly the decision was made to support SPURT directly in the manner that we're doing through that form of investment.
Supplementary question, Edmonton Kingsway.
To the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, given that all the guidelines that VenCap has were in fact set by VenCap, why has the Minister taken his arm's length approach to the level where he has abdicated his responsibility for the $200 million of taxpayers' money?
Before responding to the question, Mr. Speaker, there is a bill, a private member's bill on notice, I think, introduced by the member for Westlock Sturgeon, that would provide an opportunity for members to discuss further the role of VenCap. But I would suggest that the honourable member check Hansard in the instructions that were provided to VenCap are not only those contained in the legislation, but by way of a letter filed by the Premier at the time.
Mr. Go outside. Member for Little Bow, main question.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Over the weekend, the Premier made a very strong case with regards to the EEE Senate, which is a formula by which there could be stronger representation in the regions. Could the Premier indicate at this time whether he has been able to formally introduce a EEE Senate discussion to the agenda of the upcoming April 30th meeting of First Ministers?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. Could the Premier indicate whether that matter will be a discussion on the first Ministers of Western Premiers on May 27th and 28th I believe, held in Humboldt, Saskatchewan?
Mr. Speaker, in neither case, of course, am I the chairman of the meeting. However, I feel confident that in both of those meetings, the matter of Senate reform will be discussed.
Supplementary question. Could the Premier indicate whether other premiers, not only those of Western Canada, but certainly the regions of Canada and certainly those representing Ontario, Toronto, and Montreal, may support or have indicated interest in the EEE Senate at this time?
Mr. Speaker, in cases like this, I usually prefer to have the premiers speak for themselves. I don't believe any have publicly endorsed the concept of the EEE Senate, although the second portion of the honourable member's question was, have any expressed an interest? And I think it's fair to say that most of the premiers, being reasonable people, are prepared to look at the concept. In the gallery today is Premier Peterson of Ontario, who has expressed that it is an option that should be considered in reforming the Senate. He agrees that, along with me, that the Senate really does not appear to serve any really effective purpose right now, and that it should be considered for reform. However, we do have some differences of opinion as to how that reform might be expressed.
Speaker, a final supplementary to the Premier. Could the Premier indicate whether in implementing or putting forward the concept of the Triple E Senate, whether there are any plans of the Premier's or the various ministers of his cabinet to travel across Canada and speak on the subject and not only inform other people with regards to this objective, but as well to sell the concept?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, although I must admit I've had more success talking to the Premier of Quebec about an elected Senate than I have the Premier of Ontario, I won't blame the school that he went to, Mr. Premier. What I would like to ask the Premier, though, is in the discussions of elected Senate, is he prepared to sit down and negotiate it with Quebec and in return for some of the exclusive rights that they have asked for in language and culture? Would we give up certain exclusive rights in language and culture in return for an elected Senate, equal elected Senate?
Mr. Speaker, we would not negotiate any rights that we would not have ourselves, and therefore we feel strongly there are no special status for provinces, and we think the Triple E Senate is an excellent idea for Canada's Parliament and one that should stand on its own merits.
Supplementary question, Leader of the Opposition.
What's the Minister of Energy yapping over there again? We'll get you a chance. My question to the Premier is that after discussing it with other premiers, we know the stand of this government. Has there been any other serious proposals laid out that the Premier is aware of about Senate reform?
Mr. Speaker, there have been some discussions on a very preliminary basis where other premiers have expressed their views about the Senate, but that is up for them to express. I think all of them, though, generally agree with us that one of the real benefits of a more effective Senate would be to prevent such disgraceful legislation as the NEP, backed by the NDP and the Liberals, that devastated this province in the past.
Member for Stony Plain, followed by the member for St. Albert, if there's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to address a question to the Minister of Economic and Development and Trade, and to follow up on the exciting news release put forth in this Assembly just a few moments ago regarding the announcement of a feasibility study for a new petrochemical plant. Can the Minister provide some details regarding this project?
Don't know how to handle good news. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to provide some additional details. The proposed project and plant would produce a product known as MTBE, which is an octane enhancer. The required capital to develop such a plant is about $250 to $270 million. A very important project in the sense of value adding to a basic feedstock in Alberta are natural gas, because the ingredients that go into the production of MTBE are methanol and butane, producing an octane enhancer, which is in great demand in the United States because of their requirements for the reduced use of tetraethyl lead.
Supplementary question then, Mr. Minister. Could the minister outline some of the reasons that the 3 international firms were attracted to Alberta in this project?
Mr. Speaker, this morning's spokesman for the partners in the project indicated that there were a number of reasons. The first being a readily available feedstock that is competitively priced, which is a key reason. The second key reason, Speaker, was the taxation environment in Alberta and the overall economic climate, which was very positive in terms of the Alberta government's continued view that the economic climate and the total taxation regime is a key factor in encouraging investment in Alberta, and it was confirmed today. Another factor, Mr. Speaker, and I think it was an important one, is Alberta's history of undertaking innovative research. A number of years ago, we provided funding with Trans Mountain Pipeline to examine the feasibility of piping methanol and coal in a slurry to the west coast. And this was one of the factors that attracted Neste to Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. And I know by the catcalls to my right here that they can't have a hard time making some doom and gloom out of this announcement. But bottom line, Mr. Minister, could you indicate the number of jobs that this project will make available to Albertans?
Honourable Minister, for a moment, the Chair would like to point out to all parts of the House that the catcalls are one thing, but indeed all members should realize that they're wasting the time of a number of people. I've got about 8 more who would love to get into question period. Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this project, along with other recent announcements, are very important to Alberta's economy, not only in the direct job creation, but the spin-off that occurs as a result of sourcing of engineering and materials. But directly on the project, the investors have advised me that some 700 man-years of labor will be required in the construction of the project, as well as 100 additional permanent jobs on the Celanese site.
Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. Given that this announcement now follows on the heels of 2 major diversification projects recently announced, could you give us in terms of the broadest figures what this means in terms of total dollars and total employment, since we're so anxious to hear of good news for diversification in this province?
Mr. Speaker, I referred to the positive announcements recently made, this being the second related to petrochemicals, between the 2 totaling nearly $700 million, plus a very important announcement in the forestry industry. So just in the recent number of months, major capital investment in our province of approximately $1 billion. It's not only important in the direct effect on our economy in terms of the creation of construction activity, but also important in terms of the climate within Alberta and the response by Albertans and other investors in recognizing that Alberta is the best place in North America in which to invest.
Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, given discussions of government loan guarantees for this project, what steps, if any, is the government taking to find a Canadian company to replace the Finnish government in this consortium?
You don't want a penny of foreign investment here, do you?
Mr. Speaker, we welcome Neste as an investor in Alberta. Neste has an excellent track record around the world in terms of the manner in which it participates not only directly in its economic ventures but indirectly as members of the community. We have an entirely different view, Mr. Speaker, that we welcome Neste's involvement in Alberta.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, yet another mega project still in the energy industry. In light of these tremendous commitments to not diversifying our economy, can the Minister please tell us how he justifies reducing the amount of financial assistance for small businesses at a time when we should be doing everything possible to create long-term jobs through measures which broaden our economic base?
Mr. Speaker, I find it unbelievable how far the honourable member from Meadowlark must reach to find a negative in a positive start.
Member for St. Albert, followed by the member for Edmonton. Excuse us, honourable member. May we carry on? Thank you. St. Albert, followed by Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, Albertans now know that it's always a dangerous thing for some in our society when too many overly excited Conservative convention delegates get together, and this past weekend was no exception. At their most recent convention, these exuberant delegates passed a resolution calling on their government to consider implementing legislation that would allow employers to further ignore, subvert, and destroy employees' unions by considering right-to-work legislation. To the Minister of Labour, can the Minister assure this Assembly that neither he nor his government has the slightest intention of heeding the wishes of these extreme right-wing loonies who apparently took over his party's weekend convention? In other words, Mr. Speaker, does this minister, can he assure Albertans and this Assembly that he is not going to implement right-to-work legislation in the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, it certainly was an exciting convention. I was there, and I don't know which resolution the honourable member is discussing. I didn't see that one on the resolution book.
It sounds like the only thing that was productive was you didn't remove the word progressive from in front of the party. To the Minister, supplementary. Can the Minister assure us in this Assembly that he'll undertake to educate these convention delegates as to the true meaning of right-to-work legislation at your next convention?
Mr. Speaker, there was not a resolution passed that mentioned the words right to work. I don't know what the member is talking about. There was a resolution relating to membership in a trade union, and perhaps the honourable member isn't aware of the current legislation in the province.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Has the minister, pay attention to this one, maybe you'll understand this one. Has the minister had any discussion with the provincial treasurer on the adverse effect right-to-work legislation would have on retail sales statistics due to the reduced weekly earnings of Albertans under such legislation? Got any discussions?
Mr. Speaker, I have not had such discussions with the provincial treasurer. It is the utmost in hypothetical questions, as again there was no resolution on the order paper suggesting a mass reduction in salaries and wages.
Supplementary. My final supplementary. It's obvious that the minister doesn't understand. As the minister, is this minister aware that even the social credit government in British Columbia didn't go this far and at least has a collar around some of their more right-wing delegates that go to their conventions in regard to right to work.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not prepared to discuss British Columbia legislation in this House. If the honourable member wishes to do that, perhaps he should go to BC and be elected there. On the other hand, it's gradually getting to me through his questions, which are decidedly off the point that I think he's trying to address. I think he is referring to the motion that I mentioned. Perhaps he is unaware of the current state of legislation in this province. With the exception of the members of the Alberta Teachers Association, those who teach in the provincial schools, there is currently in this province no requirement that anyone belong to a trade union. However, there are a number of collective agreements where that has been negotiated fairly and openly between management and the unions on behalf of the employees. If management and the employees through their unions come to that decision, then it's perfectly reasonable that they can have either a pre-entry or post-entry closed shop, as it's referred to. I have no problem with that, and I don't think the rest of the delegates at the convention did have.
Supplementary question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, if we may forget that meeting of the Flat Earth Society last weekend there for a minute and just get right on to the subject, a matter of could the Minister of Labour enlighten the House as to whether or not anyone employed in a union and under a union contract or newly employed could opt out of the union, refusing to pay dues? Is that in the consideration of the legislation he's going to bring forward to the House?
Mr. Speaker, there are currently in some negotiated agreements provisions for people who do not wish to join the union for due cause, whatever that may be, to opt out of union membership. In some cases, they can send the equivalent of the union dues to a charitable organisation. There are arrangements like that within current collective agreements within the province of Alberta. But again, and as it should be, it's negotiated between the employer and the employees through their union.
Member for Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Social Services, the Minister in her budget for social services has decreased funding for social support by almost $7 million. She has decided to close Maple Ridge, a treatment centre for children suffering from behavioural and emotional problems. In effect, the Minister is attempting to save money on the backs of abused children, children who have already been victimised, many since birth. To the Minister, was the decision to close Maple Ridge made before alternatives were thoroughly investigated, as was done in the case of Hilltop House?
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fact that the estimates for social services will be back up again tomorrow afternoon and we will have an opportunity to get into detail, I can assure the honourable member that all options were explored. And basically our philosophy is that children should be treated in their home surroundings and, where possible, not subject to institutional care.
Supplementary. These children need treatment, Mr. Speaker. The department has indicated that these children will go to parent counselor homes. What studies has the minister conducted to determine the cost effectiveness of the training for parent counselors, social service support for these families, and continued treatment of these children as compared to the treatment that they were receiving at Maple Ridge?
Mr. Speaker, as always, when one gets into the so-called treatment counselling area, one deals with many subjective opinions. And, Mr. Speaker, the observations by professionals differ a great deal when speaking to the effectiveness of various kinds of counselling. And if the honourable member is looking for guarantees, those cannot be provided.
Supplementary. Is the minister aware that these children are in need of professional treatment and that foster homes and parent counselor homes will not meet the needs of these children?
Mr. Speaker, that is the opinion of the honourable member.
Well, 20 hours of training for foster parents is not sufficient. In view of the fact that the minister is reducing her expenditures by withdrawing adequate services for these children, thereby endangering their well-being, will the minister reconsider the decision to close Maple Ridge?
Mr. Speaker, the department has very excellent professionals both on staff and in a professional capacity that are on a contract basis, which can speak to the needs, who can speak to the needs of the children that we're talking about. And I can assure the honourable member that the very best interests of the children are kept in mind at all times by the department. And as for the Leader of the Opposition's continual snide comments, I would say that with respect to people who come from the farm community, I believe we can exercise as good a judgment as anybody.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, main question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Treasurer indicated last Tuesday that he was unwilling to consider our suggestion to limit the 5% tax on hotel rooms to new bookings only. Yesterday, the Minister of Tourism split from his cabinet colleague and joined our calls for the Treasurer to re-evaluate this earlier decision. It is unfair to apply this tax on reservations that have already been booked on the basis of no hotel tax. To the Treasurer, will he now accept the advice of the Minister of Tourism and do as we first suggested last Tuesday and apply the tax only to new hotel bookings?
Gosh, Mr. Speaker, I thought he's making another speech. I must have mistook it for question period. I think, Mr. Speaker, the answer to that is yes.
Fantastic. I actually prepared a question in light of that possibility. Would the minister please admit to this House and to the people of Alberta that his decision to change this earlier decision is the result of our persistent and incisive questioning?
You're way behind. No.
Now the member is into fantasy land, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, succinct, finished. Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Energy. The chairmanship of the Alberta Oil Sands Technology and Research Authority has been vacant for some time now. Could the minister tell us when we might expect this very important position to be filled?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is accurate, and it has been some time since the position has been vacant. However, we hope to be able to fill a position within a matter of a few days.
First, honourable member, may we gain the permission of the House to continue the series of questions? Opposed? Red Deer South.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister of Energy advise us of the process utilized for selecting a new chairman, and why has it taken so long?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the process included finding an executive search consultant to advertise across the country, and as a result of that, we had approximately 60 applicants for the position. The consultants recommended 8 names to a committee consisting of a number of people, including public representation. These people were interviewed, and a short list was provided, or a short list was provided to me. I interviewed those candidates, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, that given the time that it has taken, we had many, many good candidates in terms of technical and management expertise.
Final supplementary. Thank you. Might the House... one hesitates to interrupt the member for Westlock Sturgeon and your agenda. However, is it indeed a supplementary? Good. The chair also wants to point out that there are at least 6 or 7 issues which we must deal with before we get around to orders of the day. But supplementary question.
Short supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. In view of all the pressure we've put on the government and our recent success with the treasurer, could the minister tell us whether he's considering any women for the job of chairperson or chairman of the meeting?
Mr. Speaker, I indicated that there are approximately 60 applicants in the whole process, and that we have interviewed a short list, and the honourable member will have to wait the outcome.
Additional supplementary, St. Albert.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister assure us that he'll hire an Albertan for the job?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member will find out soon enough.
Thank you. The chair neglected to point out, so therefore now requests that unanimous consent of the House for the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care to give supplementary information in response to the question as raised by the Leader of the Opposition on this day. That would then allow a response from the Leader of the Opposition. Agreement? Opposed? Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition asked his first question today. Since that time, I've had an opportunity to have staff in my office contact the Cross Cancer Clinic, and the Cross Cancer Clinic began changes in their callback program in February 1986, over a year ago. The reason was to allow patients to use their own physicians, particularly in areas outside of Edmonton. They expect some savings in their program as a result of that, and also significant savings, of course, to patients because of being able to be cared for in their own communities rather than traveling to Edmonton. And of course, would not expect any deterioration in patient care. And that may explain the letter that the Honourable Leader has.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister. Instead of receiving follow-up cancer treatment at the Cross Institute, then, I suggest cancer patients are now being instructed to attend family physicians. They will then build a medical services plan for a referral back to the Cross Institute. Will the Minister explain how this saves taxpayers money?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is it's significantly less costly to the patients themselves and to the entire system if the family physician can determine whether or not there's a need for a referral, as opposed to every patient traveling to Edmonton or Calgary, as the case may be, on a regular basis. And this, I might add, Mr. Speaker, is the direction that we're trying to go in treating cancer patients, to have them treated in their own community-based hospitals. The program was implemented in Medicine Hat, I believe, in Lethbridge earlier, and we're expecting the implementation of other major programs throughout the province connected with the Cross Cancer Clinic. I can only conclude, Mr. Speaker, by saying I believe that it is an appropriate direction to go, and it was implemented by the Cross Cancer Clinic 14 months ago, well before any 3% reductions were proposed.
Point of order, Leader of the Opposition. Honourable Leader of the Opposition, point of order during question period.
Mr. Speaker, referring to under question, oral questions 35910, where it says a question not to refer to a statement made outside the House by a minister. Mr. Speaker, usually we've been used to in this House people coming and making ministerial announcements during that period, rather than having backbenchers lead into questions so the minister can make his statement that way. There's a reason for that, and nobody would deny that it isn't a significant proposal, and I would have suggested that it should have been done in the ministerial announcements. The reason I refer to 35910 is because after I'd finished my questions, I got an Alberta news release about the project. That was the first I'd heard about, Mr. Speaker. So I would suggest that rather than going this route, that ministers make their ministerial announcements in the proper place.
Mr. Speaker, this morning, in making the announcement, we had in attendance the principals of Neste, Celanese, as well of Trans Mountain Pipeline. And that is the principal reason that the announcement was made outside the House.
Point raised, advice given, advice received. House will stand by for further developments as to future ministerial statements. The chair understands that the member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche wishes to stand on a purported point of privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on the question of privilege. Mr. Speaker, it is my contention that in directing me during the course of today's oral question period to put my question to the Minister of Education en anglais, you breach the privilege enjoyed by all members of this Assembly, and you exceeded your authority. The basic right of all Albertans to conduct their business through and with their provincial government is in either of Canada's two official languages, predates the constitutional statutes which created Alberta, and was never effectively extinguished by those statutes. Accordingly, it is the right of each and every member of this Assembly to conduct their business in this Assembly at any point in the Assembly's proceeding in either official language. This is one of the privileges enjoyed by members of the Alberta Legislative Assembly. This privilege can only be denied under the authority of some instrument superior to those constitutional instruments providing for the creation and governance of our province. No such authority exists, and therefore your direction to me earlier today can enjoy the sanction of no such authority. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, I ask you to reconsider your ruling in light of the privileges of this Assembly, and I ask the unanimous consent of this Assembly to grant me that right.
The Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the point as alleged by the honourable member that language of this Assembly can be conducted in either English or French, pursuant to the issue of what was in the Northwest Territories ordinances, is now before the courts. That issue is before the courts relative to a case in Saskatchewan, a case in which the Alberta government has intervened because it might apply would apply to the province of Alberta as well as to the province of Saskatchewan. The honourable member's allegation is not, in fact, is not based on a decided case in law, and until such time as that matter has been dealt with in the Saskatchewan case now before the courts, no such right exists. And until that is established by the courts, I would suggest, therefore, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member has improperly raised a matter of privilege before this Assembly.
Agreed. The member for West Loch Sturgeon, followed by the member for Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, if I may make a point, and it'd be a small one, but I think the Minister or the Attorney General and the honourable member for Athabasca on two different points. Admittedly, whether or not to conduct the debates and the operation of the legislature in two languages is in the court. But the honourable member from Athabasca was just asking the right to to address his government or his cabinet in English or French. And in question period, I submit, I would think you could easily submit, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker, that he has the right, or any of us have the right, to ask of our government a question in French or English, which is entirely unrelated to carrying out the business of the House and doing the debating of the House.
Right on. Speaking to the point of privilege, Edmonton Highlands, Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect to the comments made by the Attorney General, the fact that this issue may be in front of the courts regarding a Saskatchewan matter is no basis upon which we cannot determine by our own will whether or not the official languages will be upheld in the Alberta Assembly. I also refer the Speaker to citation 297 Beauchesne, language of debate. The British North America Act guarantees that a member may address the House in either English or French. Now, That's right. That's right. And it goes on to say, after a semicolon, the simultaneous interpretation system ensures that debate may flow freely and intelligently. The member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche indicated his perfect willingness to provide the translation to the minister, who, by the way, I understand is also bilingual. It goes on to say, examples may be found of other languages being used in debate, but in recent years, the Speaker has tended to discourage the use of anything but the two official languages. I think that this citation speaks for itself.
Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, Mr. Speaker, before I refer to Beauchesne, on my points here, the point just raised by the member opposite specifically dealt with debate. An oral question period, we are given very clear guidance from our Honourable Speaker and from Beauchesne that questions are not to provoke debate. So her reference, Mr. Speaker, was entirely confined to the question of debate and not oral question period. Looking directly at the area of oral question period, as referred to in Beauchesne 359, I'd like to look at two citations, Mr. Speaker. One being number 6, and I am respectfully asking for your ruling on these. A question must be within the administrative competence of the government. Now, certainly this question, now, yes, just hang on. Certainly the question was within the competence of the minister to whom it was directed, given her own knowledge and study of languages. And certainly the ability to translate in French is within the competency of the good offices and clerical offices of this government. But it refers to here, Beauchesne is referring to government with the capital G, referring to Executive Council, and there are members of this Executive Council who would be able to handle questions competently in French, as indeed many of the MLAs here would be able to. But it talks about administrative competence in oral question period. This would be in some doubt when a question is delivered in a language which a person may not be able to understand. Now, Mr. Speaker, having many constituents who are French-speaking, and in talking with them in the past about this issue, none of them have ever been as ridiculous to assume and demand that question period be conducted in French in this House, given the demographics of our province. That's the first point I'd like to raise. The second is citation 359, section 4, saying a question, and before the members opposite blow their stacks here, ought not to be frivolous, and I'm using the Webster's International Abridged definition of frivolous, which says not practical in content or form. I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, given the continuous concern expressed by the members opposite that question period move along quickly and efficiently, that this, though the intent might have been good and though the actual subject matter of the question might have been good, it is not practical in content or form, and I suggest that there were frivolous reasons for phrasing it in French. Those are the two citations, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister, Technology, Research and Telecommunications.
Mr. Speaker, very briefly, the Honourable Attorney General dealt very thoroughly with the allegations and argument raised by the Honourable Member from Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche in when he tried to advance support for the purported question of privilege. With respect to the Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands and the purported support for a question of privilege as she tried to sustain in her comments, Mr. Speaker, I would just point out that those comments relate to a reference, Beauchesne, which applies in the Canadian Parliament and does not, in that respect, apply here. And I simply point out that the reference is to translation equipment, etc., and the ability to translate. Mr. Speaker, there are a good number within this Assembly who could probably understand in either French or English that conversation and in some other languages. But, Mr. Speaker, it's important for all members of the Assembly that all should have an opportunity to understand the conversations and the debate within the Assembly.
Agreed. Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In reply to the Honourable the Attorney General, relying on Beauchesne, Section 16, the Honourable Member from Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche, Mr. Speaker, may be right or may be wrong in his argument. I happen to think he's right, but certainly it is a matter of privilege, and one of the few cases of genuine privilege raised, Mr. Speaker, since I've had the honour of being in my seat.
Member for Redwater Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, since this is a multicultural country and province, am I allowed to ask questions in Ukrainian? And that way maybe I would ask more questions if it was allowed.
In response to Redwater Andrew, the chair's ruling would be exactly the same.
If I may.
Still speaking to the point of privilege.
Mr. Speaker, I think I rather resent people saying a matter like this, and we're talking about the future of the country, is frivolous. And I think that was rather a senseless comment, but something I would expect from the member. But I think this is, Mr. Speaker, an important issue. And rather than us just deciding here, and I think there is grounds, we do base most things on Beauchesne, and the minister, or the member from Athabasca, said clearly he was prepared to do it in the two languages because of lack of translation. He hasn't tried to do it with every minister. This minister was alerted, who I'm told is bilingual. It seems to me that this is an important point, and the one that perhaps the Speaker should take some time to consider, rather than just ruling it out of order, out of hand here, because I think it has implications far beyond our Legislative Assembly here in Alberta.
Rest assured that the chair is not only deeply sensitized to this issue, but fully aware of the significance of it. The chair also wishes to state that because the matter is of such importance, the chair is disappointed that the issue is raised in this manner. It's not up to the chair to decide whether or not that one wishes to get a little more media time, but it's a question that, because of the significance and seriousness, and in addition to the fact that the honourable member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche and the Speaker had some discussion with this last year, and sympathy for the chair was expressed, that hopefully the whole issue could have been raised in a far different context. Having said that, the chair is also aware that there are a number of issues at point here, and the chair would like to point out, not only to all members of this assembly, but those who may be readers of Hansard or watchers of Access Television, that indeed in no way the debate here is directed at all as being less than sensitive to what the issue truly is. But what we have been listening to for the last number of minutes is indeed dealing with the point of privilege as to the matter to be raised before this assembly, not the issue of French language. It's a matter of question of privilege. The chair would also remind all quarters of the House that our standing orders take precedence over even Beauchesne. And the chair respectfully directs that Standing Order 15.2 will come into effect, and therefore directs the member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche to conform to Standing Order 15.2 and have the information to the Speaker's office tomorrow. Orders of the day. Might the House revert to the introduction of guests?